Welcome to Sealand News Brief. This week is the 16th week of the year. Let's take a look at 30-year fixed mortgage. Last week it was a 5.125, and this week is a 5.25. Still moving up. And 15-year fixed mortgage is 4.99. And the 10-year Treasury yield is almost 3.0. So indeed it's 2.915. And right before this, meeting, I got the news that there is a rumor that FOMC meeting in May might increase the federal fund rate by 0.75, not 0.5, but more step, which is 0.75. So I think the Fed might move very, very aggressively. Okay, let's take a look at the first news. Rent-controlled apartment in New York, rent allowed increase up to 9%. The NYC, there is a rent guidelines board, and this RGB proposed a big increase for about 1 million rent-controlled apartment in New York City. Well, we often kind of confused about the rent control. The rent control is not applied to every rental apartment. There is about, as we said, about 1 million rent-controlled unit in New York City. It happened after World War II. There was a lot of soldiers came back to this country, and they don't have a place to go, so government kind of designated this rental apartment, and they started a control. So we call the rent-controlled apartment. Okay, it's about 1 million units. And according to this proposal, rent can be increased 2.7 to 4.5 for 1-year lease and 4.3 to 9% for 2-year lease. In terms of a rent control unit rent, this is a huge increase. And if these guidelines are passed in July and starts from October 1st, it may be the biggest increase for the last 10 years. And of course, a lot of things, inflations and all these landlords' payment, okay? It's really a burdensome. So landlord burden as inflation soars is reflected with this increase. But the problem is also tenant side. They might have also big complaints because even rent-controlled unit increased this much. Then other regular, just the regular rental units, probably much higher increase rate. Of course, each individual landlord can do that. So according to Elliman's report, we're talking about regular rent, the median rent for 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan in March was $3,788, which is, look at this number, 24.2% up compared to a year ago. So that's why everybody is talking about rent increase now. Now, we don't talk about the home price increase that much. I mean, it's already up there, okay? The last 1 year, for instance, major 20 cities increase rate was 19%. Okay, but it's kind of slowed down. But now we're talking about rent increase. As you can see, this piece of news from Korea Times. 그 뉴욕에는 렌트 컨트롤 유닛이 한 1 밀리언 유닛 정도 되는데 거기에 이제 RGB라고 렌트 가이드라인스 보드가 있어서 그걸 컨트롤 해주죠. 렌트 인크리즈 하는 거를. 근데 요번에 아주 상당히 많이 인크리즈를 허용했다. 그래서 10월 1일서부터 렌트가 되는 그러한 렌트 컨트롤 유닛에 이렇게 올릴 수가 있다. 제일 많이 올리는 거는 지금 2-year 리즈의 9%까지도 올릴 수가 있다. 요 레인지에 대한 건 제가 자세히 모르겠는데요. 하여튼 우리가 보통 렌트 컨트롤드 유닛은 그렇게 많이 하지를 않으니까 상대하지 않으니까. 물론 이제 랜로드의 이제 부담을 덜어주기 위해서 그렇게 허가를 했는데 또 the other side 코인이 되면 이제 테넌트들은 또 굉장히 부담이 크겠죠. 그것이 이제 렌트 컨트롤 유닛 얘기고 일반 유닛들도 지금 상당히 렌트가 올라가고 있다. 엘리먼 리포트에 의하면 미디언 렌트가 완배들은 맨하탄 미디언 렌트가 3월 달에 3,788불인데 1년 전 대비 24% 정도가 올랐다. 그런 뉴스가 지금 들어왔고요. Okay, next news is residential new construction increased in March. A bit of good news, according to U.S. Department of Commerce report, new home construction increased 0.3% from the last month. So compared to February, in March, 0.3%, and then total 1.79 million units, increasing 2 consecutive months from February. So February increased and March increased, which is the highest since 2006, and it's a 4% up from a year ago. Also, it's a good sign. And apartment multifamily units construction increased, but single-family construction decreased. And also, number of permits is important because that can show the future trend. The number of permits increased 0.4% to 1.87 million from last month, and that is up 6.7% from a year ago. So new construction is new construction sector looks pretty good. 그 뉴 컨스트럭션은 지금 인크리즈 되고 있는 걸로 나오네요. 그죠? 2월달, 3월달. 그래서 전달 대비 0.3% 늘어서 지금 179만 채가 지금 뉴 컨스트럭션이 됐고요. 그다음에 여기 퍼밋도 지금 늘어서 0.4%가 전분달 대비 늘었고, 그다음에 퍼밋의 경우에 1년 전보다는 6.7%가 늘었다. 그래서 뉴 컨스트럭션은 지금 좋은 굿 뉴스가 되고 있고요. Okay, next news is homeowner groups fight investors push into suburbs. And some small group of neighborhood volunteers are blocking companies from buying single-family homes, rewriting home ownership rulebooks to thwart investor purchases of suburban housing. But simply saying they don't like investors because investors keeps buying a lot of suburban homes. Some homeowners association believe that the rise in home purchase by rental investors. Okay. Well, this is capitalism. So if they have money, they want to buy the house and rent out. There's no law can prevent that. But some homeowners association now they try to sort of block that activities somehow, because if investors keep buying the houses and if they keep renting out, then what's going to happen? The neighborhood becomes less desirable, and the whole environment kind of decline. That's what they believe as a homeowner's point of view. Investors are also making it more difficult for local families to buy houses, this group says. Well, somewhat is true, yes. But the other hand, also they have money, so they can buy it, and nobody can really block them. But there is some way to kind of thwart that kind of purchase, investors' purchase. For instance, so homeowners association, I think they're talking about basically like rural areas, some kind of a complex, right? And so they pay a certain amount of maintenance fee monthly. In that kind of a complex, okay, they can do something. They can make a condo rules. And I think most of us are familiar with the co-op rules. Some co-ops, they can do that. In other words, if you purchase the co-op unit, then the buyer has to live in for 2 years before they can rent out, for instance. Or the buyer has to live 6 months, and then they can rent out another year. And again, after that, they have to live in 6 months, etc. So they can set some kind of a rules, so intimidate the investors' purchases. Okay, but in reality, is investors' purchases have been increased in recent years and accounted for more than 1 in 5 home sales in December. So this is a really big number. Investors unit is 1 out of 5 homes. It's investors unit. So that's a huge. 지금 이제 이렇게 그 인베스터들이 뭐 지금 여기서 얘기하는 인베스터는 뭐 한 채를 사는 뭐 이 정도의 인베스터들 얘기는 아니고요. 주로 여러 채를 한꺼번에 막 사들이는 그런 펀드를 가진 인베스터들을 주로 얘기하는데, 이 루럴 에어리아에 그런 컴플렉스 같은 데를 또 한꺼번에 사버리니까, 그리고서는 어떻게 하느냐? 뭐 누군가 들어와서 잘 살면 되지만 그 오너들이 사는 게 아니고 렌트하우스를 한단 말이죠. 렌트를 준단 말이죠. 그러니까 전체적으로 렌트를 주면은 네이버후드가 좀 디클라인 된다, 뭐 그런 것들이 많이 있잖아요. 렌트들이 많이 살면. 그래서 홈 오너들이 어소시에이션의 그 오너들이 어떤 룰을 만들어서 마치 코업 같이 바이어가 사면 뭐 1년을 살아야 그 다음에는 렌트를 줄 수 있다라든지 그런 룰을 이제 만들기 시작을 했다. 그런 얘기인데, 아무튼 인베스터들이 굉장히 늘어나고 있다. 그 5채 중에 하나는 인베스터들 용이다. 이 정도로 나올 정도까지도 그렇게 인베스터들이 지금 많이 활동하고 있다. 그런 뉴스가 들어와 있었고요. 월스트리트 저널 어저께. Okay, next news is we're talking about some tactics with this high inflation. How can we survive? Well, the Wall Street Journal, this article reported the following. A home is your castle against the rising inflation. In other words, your home is the very good protection against inflation. So bottom line is you have to buy a home. That's what they're saying basically. The mortgage interest rate have been rising at the fastest pace in years. We know that. In the last year it was like 3.2, now this year 5 interest rate. And but if you are holding back from buying a house because of the rise in rates, consider that inflation is up even more. In other words, increasing the slope, let's say increasing speed, okay? inflation speed is much higher, much faster increase. So you have to think about that. So who's fast in terms of increasing interest rate or inflation rate? Of course, inflation rate is much higher at this moment. So you have to think about it. And kind of is interesting thinking. So right now, interest rate is 5%. Mortgage interest rate is 5%. So you purchase mortgage. In other words, you borrow the money at 5%. Okay. But 1 year later, because interest is going up, inflation is going up. So as a year later, as year goes, the basically your loan amount will be depreciated by 8.5%. So this article is saying you are the winner. So borrow 5% now, and a few years later, we don't know inflation will keep moving up. But let's say short-term, year later, within a year, interest rate, inflation is not going to go down. But also interesting. Well, if Fed moves aggressively, as I said, Fed in May, they will increase federal fund rate by 0.75. I just heard today, so that they can lower the inflation. Let's assume that. So if inflation drops as predicted because of the Fed move, interest rate on fixed rate mortgage will likely decline as well. Likely, he said. Well, fixed rate mortgage is depending on the 10-year treasury yield, but he said that's why it's a likely decline as well. Now, this means you should be able to refinance your 5% mortgage at a lower rate if inflation goes down, and also if interest rate goes down, then you can refinance, okay? Because interest rate lower than 5%. And if inflation exceeds expectation, in other words, inflation goes more than what you expected, inflation, then you already got in the game. You got the 5% mortgage, and inflation goes up and up, you would be better off. Okay, so that's why this article is saying you have to buy with what? Fixed mortgage interest rate. 5% still is okay. What he's saying is because it's lower than inflation rate. And again, the reason the inflation stay high is first the supply chain problem. Secondly, particularly a supply chain problem because of particularly China situation. They shut down some major parts of China's economy right now because of COVID-19. And secondly, European Union may join with the US in expanding the embargo against the Russian energy. And energy is a big issue right now, right? As I said, a lot of countries will rely on Russian energy supply. And oil prices are going to go high. And the third, countries that cannot pay their bills make money by making money. What does it mean? They print out money. That's what US does, actually. The Fed has been printing a vast quantity of money for decades, which portends more inflation, against which a home provides excellent protection. In other words, US keep printing dollars, okay? In that case, inflation will hit the sky. In that case, still, your home, you already purchased a home, will provide excellent protection, okay? Because the home has the value. And you paying, let's say, fixed rate of mortgage, while inflation goes to sky. So think about it. And 지금 그 월스트리트저널의 그 이제 사설로 나온 글이 제가 소개해드리는데 이분의 얘기는 지금 5%도 굉장히 좋은 거다. 왜냐하면 인플레이션 레이트이 8.6이다. 예를 들어서. 그럼 인플레이션 레이트이 높지 않느냐 이거죠. 그러면 지금 5%의 집을 사서 1년 뒤에 갚는다고 해도 그만큼 인플레이션이기 때문에 그 빌린 돈 가치가 떨어진다. 이런 지금 이론이거든요. 아무튼 만약에 이제 이 사설 신문의 작전은 지금 페드가 움직여서 이자율이 내려간다 그래도 그것도 오케이. 왜냐하면 지금 현재 5%에 빌렸다. 그러면 내려가면은 이 모기지의 특성은 계속 뭐 리파이낸스도 할 수 있고요. 이런 걸 다 정부에서 올라고 하니까 만약의 경우에 인플레이션을 잡았다. 그러면 most likely fixed rate mortgage rate도 내려갈 거다. 그러면 리파이낸싱 해라. 이런 얘기. 그런데 만약에 인플레이션이 계속 올라간다. 그럼 already you are ahead of game. 왜 5%에 벌써 락을 해놓고 지금 가지고 있으니까. 인플레이션 올라가는 만큼 여러분들은 이익을 본다. 그런 지금 이론이고요. 인플레이션이 왜 지금 계속 올라갈 수밖에 없느냐? 그 서플라이 체인, 그죠? 특히 중국은 지금 뭐 셧다운 해가지고 지금 굉장히 힘들어요. 코비드 때문에. 그다음에 이제 지금 전쟁 상황 있죠. 러시안 에너지에 대해서 우리가 임박하고 그러면 5월까지 계속 움직이기 때문에 그다음에 이제 또 다른 제3의 원인은 이 돈들을 찍어내기 때문에 그죠. 특히 미국도 마찬가지 US 달러를 막 찍어내기 때문에 그 막 돈을 찍어낼 때는 부동산을 가지고 있는 것이 베스트 프로텍션이다. 자, 그런 그 월스트리트저널 사설이 있었습니다. 그래서 여러분들도 한번 생각해 보실 필요가 있을 것 같아서 residential market is bubbled. 지금 한국 중앙일보에서 reported. The title was residential is really bubble or not, and because one president of Federal Bank of Dallas said, not the president, the economist said, point out that right now home price increasing pace is bigger than supply demand structure and is out of the fundamentals. Well, we don't know about details, but the economists, they have some fundamentals, okay? And it's out of that fundamental numbers, factors, whatever. So that's why this economist saying this is dangerous. And two main factors of a bubbling conspiracy are the reason that they're saying is a bubble. There are two reasons. One is FOMO. FOMO is abbreviation of fearing of missing out. Meaning a lot of people saying, oh, we have to buy a house. Well, as we said, actually, we said that, right? You have to buy a house. So because of that, other people, they're buying houses. And it's a kind of missing out fear. A lot of people, peer pressure is similar to, that guy is buying, also I have to buy. If I don't buy, then I'm going to be, missing out. I'm going to be alone. That kind of a fear, psychological fear, syndrome. That's why it's a bubble. The second is investors driving force. That's the second reason, because not the real buyers, the real user buyers, but investors driving. Okay. And somewhat is true because investor is 33% of the total purchases, and it is 5% higher than 10-year average right now. So that's huge. We know that. That's why this economist is saying right now is a bubble. But however, the other opinion is the opponent. against bubbling theory is saying that the bank guidelines for mortgage loans are much tighter than 2009 financial crisis. Yeah, that's a very important point. Right now, I think we talked about in the case study as well. In this situation, financial crisis back then, 2009, that time, the problem was the buyer could not get the $620,000 loan, but bank just gave him. That was a problem. But right now, the bank guideline is very tough, actually, so very sound. That's why it's not bubble. The opponents saying that, okay, you are the final judge, but you can hear a lot of these different stories. 지금 그 중앙일보에 잠깐 기사 하나 소개해드리는데요. 리얼 에스테이트 마켓, 부동산 주택 마켓이 지금 버블이냐 하는 거 가지고 지금 그 달라스 연준의 은행이 12개 있다고 그랬죠. 미국 전체. 그중에서 달라스 은행의 경제학자들이 지금 현재 집값이 정상이 아니다. 서플라이 디맨드에서 나타나는 정상적인 가격 상승이 아니고 지금 펀더멘털에서 지금 이탈돼 있다. 지금 그렇게 얘기를 해가지고 이게 이제 버블이다 이렇게 얘기를 하는데 두 가지 이유를 대는데 지금 이 사이콜로지컬한 지금 신드롬이 있다. FOMO, fearing of missing out. 나 혼자만 떨어지는 거 아닌가? 나 혼자만 외톨이 되는 거 아니야? 안 사면 그래서 막 살라고 한다는 거. 그 다음에 또 이제 또 한 가지는 이제 인베스터들이 드라이빙 포스하는 거. 그래서 33%가 지금 인베스트인데 10year average보다 지금 5%가 많다. 그러므로 해서 지금 이게 버블이다. 그러나 반대 의견은 그렇지 않다. 왜냐하면 은행의 가이드라인이 굉장히 터프하고 지금은 건강하다. 금융위기 때는 우리가 그냥 은행이 그냥 문을 열고 다 줬기 때문에 문제가 된다. Okay. The next news is the Blackstone bets big on student housing. This is interesting. Well, I was not aware of that. Student housing is lucrative. But if Blackstone invested, yes, then I know. Blackstone Inc. agrees to buy student housing owner American campus student housing owner American campus communities, we call ACC, in a deal valuing the company at about $12.8 billion, including that. And this is, and they try to see the market. The rent will continue to rise as more college students return to campus. So that's why Blackstone invested. Once Blackstone somewhere, if Blackstone invested, then we need to look at it. At least you go to in front of a college and you at least you purchase an apartment and then rent out. Okay, Austin, Texas-based ACC, this company that Blackstone bought, is the largest publicly traded owner and developer of student housing in the US. The deal marks Blackstone's single biggest foray into the sector to date. And well, national housing shortage is pushing up the rents near campus too, and return of more international students could boost the demand further. And that has drawn in large investors such as Blackstone and the Brookfield Asset Management Inc. 오케이, 그 블랙스톤이 유명하죠. 블랙스톤 부동산으로 펀드가 뭐 우리가 상상할 수 없을 정도로 엄청나게 많은 펀드로 움직이는 부동산 쪽에 근데 특이한 게 그 학교 앞에 하우징 그거를 이제 관리하고 디벨롭하는 컴퍼니를 사버렸어요. 12.8 빌리언 주고 샀어요. 블랙스톤이 판단하기에는 지금 학교 앞에 렌털 하우징도 굉장히 올라갈 것이다. And that's why 블랙스톤이 지금 그런 회사를 12 빌리언이나 주고 사들였다. 블랙스톤이 어디 투자한다는 방향을 보면 여러분들이 어디가 지금 투자해서 돈을 벌 수 있다는 것을 감을 잡을 수가 있다. 그래서 재밌는 뉴스여서 하나 지금 소개를 해드렸고요. Next, investors purchase bid interest rate hike. Well, we keep talking about investors. Investors are a problem, is it? Typical buyers are trying to buy home before mortgage interest rates going up, but investors with the funds, okay, they don't care. They keep buying because currently about $60 billion funds are ready to enter into residential market, like Blackstone, for instance. And this might be the reason the home price could be uphill mode, even though transactions reduced overall and interest rate increased. Okay, but what about small investors? How are we going to do? Well, small investors can participate through REITs. For instance, the one of ETF. We're not going to talk about detailed ETF, but I think for someone who's familiar with the stocks, they know it is one of ETFs is iShare REZ. Which is concentrated into apartment and single family house. So you can invest your small money to this kind of REITs. And also Blackstone's smallest investment slot is 2,500. So you can invest in this kind of companies. Then yes, you have a very good return, I would say. And personally, I am also interested in Blackstone. So this is a simple chart, home purchase between owners and investors. So this kind of a pinkish line is investors over year-over-year the purchases, home purchases, okay? And the gray line is owner-occupied over a year-over-year. So sometimes investors more, sometimes less, but right now, let's look at this. Investors going up and up and up right now is much higher than owner-occupied. Okay, that's create some problem in a sense, and but anyway, money flows. They consume money to make money. 오케이, 지금 again 인베스터들 얘기를 많이 했죠 우리가. 근데 인베스터들의 경우는 지금 인트레스트 레이트 올라가는 거와 상관없이도 굉장히 많이 사들이고 있다 주택을. 그 렌트주는 아까 똑같은 얘기 했죠 우리가. 그래서 그런 자금으로 60 빌리언 정도가 지금 레지던셜 마켓으로 준비가 돼 있다. 그러면 그런 이유로 해서 집값은 계속 올라가는 모드로 돼 있다. 그러니까 작년처럼 샤프하게 올라가지는 않지만은 그 거래수는 줄어서도 또 인트레스트 레이트는 계속 올라가더라도 집값은 그렇게 떨어질 것 같지는 않다. 그럼 여러분들은 어떻게 할 수 있느냐? 리츠에 투자하실 수가 있다. 그렇게 좋다면 지금 부동산 투자가 그래서 리턴을 1년에 한 7%, 8% 할 수 있다면 여러분들도 이런 ETF로 주식으로 투자할 수 있다. 이런 iShare REZ 아니면 블랙스톤의 미니멈 한 구자는 2,500불을 해서 하면 블랙스톤 같은 경우는 한 7, 8% 1년에 리턴을 줄 수 있다. 그래서 이 차트는 지금 그 아까 본 대로. Okay, that's it right now. I think I told Jeff it's 11 o'clock. Okay, that's it for this week's news brief from CU Land. And see you all next week. Thank you for your joining.